The Arena of Chains. The arena roared with chaos as thousands of alien spectators cheered for blood. The Galactic Arena, known as the Pit of Chains, was infamous across the galaxy, a place where prisoners of war, captured rebels, and innocent souls were forced to fight for the entertainment of the cruel and powerful. Under the control of Malgrin, a merciless intergalactic warlord, no one had ever escaped its deadly grip. In the cold, damp cells below the arena, Xerok, a towering alien with thick, armored skin and piercing orange eyes, sat in silence. His hands were bound by glowing chains that hummed with energy, suppressing his strength. Xerok had once been a proud warrior from the planet Krathis, but now, like countless others, he was reduced to a pawn in Malgrin's twisted games. Xerok had learned one rule in the arena: survive. Yet survival came with a cost. The longer he lived, the more he fought, and the more he lost pieces of himself. His dreams of freedom had faded, replaced by a hollow acceptance of his fate. But today, something was different. There was talk of a new prisoner, a human. The guards dragged the newcomer into the cell block, throwing him roughly into a cage across from Xerok's. Xerok leaned forward, his heavy chains clinking, to get a better look. The human was smaller than the other fighters, with unremarkable features and a lean build. His dark hair was messy, his clothes torn, and his face bore a mixture of exhaustion and defiance. He looked out of place in the pit of monsters. The other prisoners jeered at the human, mocking him in their various alien languages. "He won't last a single round," one of them sneered. Xerok stayed silent, observing. There was something about this human that intrigued him, something different. The human, whose name was Ethan Drake, ignored the taunts. He sat against the wall of his cell, his eyes scanning the room. Unlike the other prisoners who looked defeated, Ethan's gaze was sharp, calculating. Xerok noticed how the human studied the guards' movements, the positioning of the chains, and even the energy field that separated their cells. The arena's loudspeakers crackled to life, and Malgrin's voice echoed through the chambers. "Welcome, slaves, to another glorious day in my arena. Today, we have a special treat for you, a pathetic human from the backwater planet of Earth. Let's see how long he survives." The announcement was met with laughter and cheers from the crowd above. Xerok's stomach churned. He had seen too many fighters thrown into the arena unprepared, only to be torn apart for sport. He didn't know why, but the idea of watching this human meet the same fate unsettled him. Moments later, guards arrived to collect Ethan. He stood without resistance, his hands bound by energy cuffs. As they led him toward the arena, Xerok couldn't help but speak. "Human," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "You don't have to fight. Stay down. Survive another day." Ethan paused, turning to meet Xerok's gaze. His eyes held a fire Xerok hadn't seen in years. "I'm not just here to survive," Ethan replied calmly. "I'm here to fight back." The words struck Xerok like a blow. Fight back. It was impossible. No one fought back against Malgrin and lived to tell the tale. Yet there was no fear in Ethan's voice, only determination. As the gates to the arena opened, the roar of the crowd became deafening. Xerok watched as Ethan stepped into the blinding light of the arena, his small figure dwarfed by the massive stone walls and the monstrous creature waiting for him. The beast was a hulking, four-legged predator with razor-sharp claws and rows of teeth that gleamed in the sunlight. The announcer's voice boomed. "Let the fight begin." The beast charged at Ethan with a thunderous roar, its claws tearing through the ground. Xerok expected the human to panic, to freeze like so many others had. But Ethan moved. He sidestepped the beast's attack with surprising agility, his movements quick and precise. The crowd gasped as Ethan used the arena's terrain to his advantage, dodging and weaving around the beast. He grabbed a loose piece of debris, a broken metal rod, and used it to fend off the creature. It wasn't strength that kept him alive, it was his cleverness. Xerok couldn't take his eyes off the fight. Ethan wasn't just surviving. He was outsmarting the beast. When the creature lunged again, Ethan jammed the rod into its exposed side, causing it to stagger. The crowd, initially hostile, began to cheer for the underdog. The fight ended with Ethan standing over the defeated beast, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. He had won, not through brute force, but through strategy and determination. Xaruk felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. As Ethan was led back to his cell, bruised but alive, he caught Xaruk's eye. There was no smugness in his expression, only quiet resolve. Xaruk realized that this human might be more than just another prisoner. Perhaps, against all odds, Ethan could be the spark that would ignite a rebellion. For the first time in a long time, Xaruk allowed himself to wonder, could freedom be possible? The human's first fight. The metallic clang of the arena gates echoed as Ethan was shoved back into his cell. Blood dripped from a shallow cut on his brow, but his expression was calm, his breathing steady. Xaruk watched him intently, his heavy chains clinking as he shifted closer to the bars. Something about this human had disrupted the rhythm of the arena, a rhythm built on despair and submission. "You surprised them," Xaruk rumbled, his deep voice carrying across the cell block. It wasn't praise, it was curiosity. "No one has fought like that before." Ethan leaned against the cold wall, wiping his face with the edge of his torn sleeve. "It's not about fighting harder," he replied simply. "It's about fighting smarter." Xaruk tilted his head. His alien features, though fierce, softened in contemplation. "Smarter won't keep you alive long in this place. Malgren doesn't tolerate defiance." Ethan met his gaze. "Good," he said with quiet determination. "I'm not here to entertain him." Before Xaruk could reply, the cell block buzzed with the arrival of guards. They stomped in with their energy weapons humming, flanking the sleek, multi-eyed alien who wore an aura of superiority. This was Ralek, Malgren's right-hand lieutenant and the arena's overseer. "You're full of surprises, human," Ralek sneered, his voice oily. "The crowd liked your little performance. But don't get comfortable. Tomorrow, you face something that will tear that cleverness of yours apart." Ethan didn't flinch. He held Ralek's gaze, his silence sharper than any words. Frustrated by the lack of fear, Ralek slammed the energy bars of the cell, sending a crackling jolt through the room. The guards laughed as they left, their heavy boots echoing in the silence that followed. Xaruk studied Ethan, intrigued. "You should be afraid," he said finally. "Malgren doesn't give second chances." Ethan leaned forward, his voice low and firm. "I'm not afraid of Malgren. Fear is how he keeps you chained. I've seen it before, on Earth, in wars, in every bully who thinks power makes them untouchable." Xaruk's orange eyes narrowed. "And what happens when the bully has the bigger weapons?" "You take the weapons away," Ethan said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the universe. Xaruk stared at the human, his mind wrestling with the impossible thought that this fragile being might actually believe he could challenge Malgren. A flicker of something unfamiliar stirred in Xaruk's chest. Not hope. No, he'd buried that long ago. But curiosity. And maybe, just maybe, the smallest sliver of belief. The next morning, the arena buzzed with anticipation. The crowd had grown, eager to see the human's next fight. Rumors swirled of a new combatant, one unlike any the arena had seen before. Xaruk listened from his cell, dread coiling in his stomach. He had seen what Malgren considered special. It was never a fair fight. Ethan stood at the gate, his wrists bound again by the glowing energy cuffs. The guards smirked as they shoved him forward, their jeers bouncing off the stone walls. "Let's see how smart you are this time, human," one sneered. The gates creaked open, and the crowd's roar surged like a tidal wave. Ethan stepped into the sunlight, shielding his eyes briefly before they locked onto his opponent. It wasn't a creature this time. It was a machine. The hulking, four-legged robot gleamed under the sun, its metallic limbs bristling with weapons. Twin energy cannons rotated on its shoulders, and its head, shaped like a predatory bird, glowed with piercing red eyes. This was Malgren's newest creation, the Predatrix. The announcer's voice boomed, dripping with mockery. "Ladies and gentlemen, behold the future of war. Our human challenger versus the Predatrix, a machine designed for one purpose: annihilation." Ethan's expression didn't change, but Xerac, watching from the shadows of his cell, felt his stomach sink. The crowd's cheers drowned out the Predatrix's mechanical whirs as it advanced, its clawed feet tearing into the arena floor. The fight began. The Predatrix moved with unnerving speed for its size, its cannons firing bursts of plasma that scorched the ground where Ethan had been moments before. The human ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding the blasts. He darted behind a broken pillar, using the arena's debris for cover. The machine fired again, shattering the pillar into rubble. Ethan sprinted toward the arena's edge, his eyes scanning the walls, the ground, the Predatrix itself. He wasn't running out of fear. He was looking for something. Xerac clenched his fists. What was the human doing? He couldn't possibly outfight a machine. Then Ethan made his move. As the Predatrix fired another round, Ethan dodged and grabbed a piece of jagged metal from the debris. With the speed of a predator, he sprinted toward the machine, weaving through its barrage of plasma. The crowd gasped as he dove under the machine's legs, jamming the metal shard into a joint. The Predatrix stumbled, its movements jerky as sparks flew from its damaged limb. But it wasn't enough to stop it. The machine turned, its cannons charging for a devastating blast. Ethan was ready. He rolled to the side, grabbing a loose piece of wiring he had ripped from the debris earlier. As the Predatrix fired, he hurled the wiring into the exposed joint. The machine convulsed, its systems shorting out in a shower of sparks. It collapsed, motionless. The crowd erupted into stunned silence, followed by deafening cheers. Ethan stood, bloodied and exhausted, but victorious. He didn't bask in the applause. He turned to the stands where Malgren watched, his expression twisted with fury. Ethan raised his voice, loud enough to cut through the chaos. "Your machine isn't unbeatable. Neither are you." Back in the cell block, Xerac leaned back, a slow, thoughtful smile spreading across his face. For the first time, he believed Ethan might be more than just another fighter. He might be a catalyst, one that could finally break the chains of the arena. The spark of rebellion. The air in the dimly lit cell block felt different after Ethan's victory. It wasn't just the hushed whispers among the prisoners, or the furtive glances they cast toward the human cell. It was something deeper, a ripple beneath the surface, a tremor of defiance that hadn't been felt in years. Xerac sat in the shadows of his cage, his orange eyes fixed on the human across from him. Ethan was pacing, his steps deliberate, his gaze distant as though mapping out a plan only he could see. Xerac's heavy chains rattled as he shifted, drawing Ethan's attention. "You're alive," Xerac said gruffly, his voice carrying a mix of respect and disbelief. "But you've made yourself a target. Malgren doesn't tolerate symbols of hope." Ethan stopped and turned to face him. "I didn't come here to be a symbol. I came to fight back." Xerac narrowed his eyes. "You don't fight back in this place. You survive. You keep your head down, and maybe, just maybe, you live long enough to die of old age." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Is that what you've been doing? Surviving?" The question hung in the stale air, sharp and cutting. Xerac didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence spoke of years of battles fought not for victory, but for the grim reward of another day alive. Ethan stepped closer to the energy bars of his cell. "What if there's a way out?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. "A way to take this place down." Xerac scoffed. "You think you're the first to dream of escape. Do you know how many have tried? Hundreds, maybe thousands, all dead." Ethan didn't flinch. They failed because they didn't have a plan, or because they didn't have someone like you. Xerac leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the cell block. "Someone like me," he growled. "And what am I, human?" "You're a warrior," Ethan said firmly. "You know this place, its weaknesses, its strengths. You've seen every crack in the armor. You've just been too afraid to use it." The accusation burned, but Sarah couldn't deny the truth in Ethan's words. He had noticed the flaws, the blind spots in the guards' patrols, the inconsistencies in the energy fields. But what good was knowledge without action? Before Sarah could reply, a faint buzzing sound filled the block. The guards were approaching. Ethan's posture straightened as he stepped back into the shadows of his cell. The guards entered, dragging a limp prisoner between them. Blood trailed behind the body, a grim reminder of what happened to those who stepped out of line. Zarok felt the familiar weight of fear settle over the block, the oppressive silence of prisoners too scared to speak. As the guards passed Ethan's cell, one of them paused. "You're lucky, human," he sneered. "The crowd likes you, for now, but your luck won't last." Ethan didn't reply, his face a mask of indifference. The guard spat on the ground and moved on, his laughter fading into the distance. When the cell block was quiet again, Ethan leaned closer to the energy bars. "Luck runs out," he said softly, his voice carrying to Sarok, "but strategy doesn't." Sarok tilted his head. "And what strategy do you have, human, besides getting yourself killed?" Ethan glanced around, ensuring no one was listening. Then he stepped even closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "The energy fields. They're not as strong near the maintenance tunnels. I've seen the guards avoid those areas." Sarok stiffened. He had noticed the same thing, but had dismissed it as irrelevant. "You'd need a distraction," he muttered. "Something big. And even then, you'd have to deal with the guards." Ethan nodded. "That's where you come in." Sarok let out a bitter laugh. "And why would I risk my life for your plan? Why should I trust you?" "Because I'm not just fighting for me," Ethan said, his voice steady and unwavering. "I'm fighting for everyone here. For you. For the ones who think survival is all they have left. This isn't about hope, Sarok. It's about freedom." The word hit Sarok like a blow. Freedom. He had stopped dreaming of it long ago, burying the desire under layers of cynicism and fear. But now, staring at this fragile human with fire in his eyes, Sarok felt the faint stirrings of something he thought he'd lost forever. Hope. Before Sarok could respond, a voice hissed from the neighboring cell. "If you two keep talking, the guards will hear, and then we'll all be dead." Sarok turned to see a wiry, insect-like alien named Grelk, one of the oldest prisoners in the block. Grelk's compound eyes glimmered with a mix of fear and curiosity. "But if you're serious about escape," Grelk added cautiously, "count me in." Ethan smiled faintly. "Good, because this plan won't work without all of us." Sarok leaned back, his mind racing. Could this human really be the one to do what no one else had managed? The odds were against them. The risks were immense. But for the first time in years, Sarok felt a spark reignite in his chest. It wasn't just rebellion. It was belief. The arena's secrets. The dark tunnels beneath the arena were deathly quiet, except for the faint hum of energy fields and the occasional drip of water echoing in the distance. Sarok moved cautiously, his massive form blending into the shadows, while Ethan followed close behind, his sharp eyes scanning every corner. They had slipped past the guards during the chaotic aftermath of Ethan's last fight, using the brief window of distraction to explore the one place prisoners were never allowed to tread. The maintenance corridors. These tunnels weren't built for prisoners. Sarok rumbled, his deep voice barely above a whisper. "They're for the engineers, Malgren's people. If we're caught down here." Ethan interrupted, his tone calm but resolute. "Then we make sure we're not caught." Sarok glanced over his shoulder at the human, who held a stolen data pad, its screen flickering with schematics of the arena. Ethan had taken it from a careless guard earlier that day, a bold move that would have gotten anyone else executed on the spot. But Ethan seemed to thrive on risk. "Where did you learn to read alien tech?" Xerac asked, his curiosity breaking through his gruff demeanor. "Earth isn't as backward as you think," Ethan replied with a faint smirk. "Besides, I've had practice. In war, knowing your enemy's tools can mean the difference between life and death." Xerac grunted in acknowledgement, impressed despite himself. The human had a knack for seeing opportunities where others saw only dead ends. They stopped at a junction where the tunnel split into 3 paths. Ethan examined the data pad, comparing the map to their surroundings. "This way," he said, pointing to the left. "It leads to the power core." Xerac hesitated. "The power core is the heart of the arena systems. It'll be heavily guarded." Ethan's eyes met his. "Exactly. If we take it out, we cripple the entire operation." Xerac's jaw tightened. The human's plan was reckless, bordering on suicidal. But as much as he hated to admit it, it also made sense. Malgren's power wasn't just in his armies or his machines. It was in the fear he cultivated, the control he wielded over every aspect of the arena. Destroying that control would be a blow the warlord couldn't ignore. They continued down the tunnel, the walls narrowing as they approached the core. The air grew warmer, humming with energy from the massive generators that powered the arena above. Ethan stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. Xerac froze, his sharp instincts sensing the same thing. They weren't alone. From the shadows ahead, a group of guards emerged, their energy weapons glowing ominously. Their leader, a reptilian alien with gleaming scales and a cruel smile, stepped forward. "Did you really think you could sneak around unnoticed?" he hissed, his forked tongue flicking. Ethan's grip tightened on the data pad, his mind racing. Xerac's muscles tensed, ready to fight, but the human raised a hand to stop him. "Wait," Ethan muttered under his breath. "Let me handle this." Xerac frowned but stayed still, his orange eyes locked on the guards. Ethan stepped forward, his posture relaxed, but his expression cold. "You're right," he said, his voice calm and steady. "We didn't expect to go unnoticed, but we didn't expect you to be this careless, either." The reptilian guard narrowed his eyes. "Careless? You're the ones walking into a death trap." Ethan smirked. "Am I? You've been standing there with your weapons ready, but none of you have called for reinforcements. Why is that? Because you don't want Malgren to know you let prisoners get this far, or because you're hoping to deal with us quietly and take the credit yourselves." The guards exchanged uneasy glances. Ethan pressed on, his voice growing sharper. "You're not loyal to Malgren. You're loyal to fear. And right now, you're scared of him finding out how badly you failed." The reptilian guard's smile faltered, doubt flickering in his yellow eyes. "Let us pass," Ethan said firmly. "And when this is over, you can tell Malgren you never saw us." For a moment, no one moved. Xerac's hands itched to strike, but Ethan's words seemed to have struck deeper than any weapon could. The guards hesitated, their grip on their weapons loosening. Finally, the leader hissed in frustration. "You're fools if you think you can stop him," he spat, but he stepped aside, motioning for his team to follow. "Go. Die in whatever stupid plan you're cooking up." Ethan nodded and motioned for Xerac to follow. As they passed, Xerac leaned down and whispered, "You bluffed them." Ethan smirked. Bluffs only work if they have something to lose. When they reached the door to the power core, Xerac couldn't help but feel a flicker of admiration. Ethan was different, dangerous, yes, but in a way that inspired others to believe the impossible. And Xerac was starting to believe too. As the heavy doors slid open, revealing the blinding light of the core's machinery, Xerac's deep voice rumbled. "If this is what rebellion looks like, human, then count me in." Ethan smiled. "Good, because we're just getting started." The special event. The arena was alive with an energy unlike anything before. The crowd's anticipation buzzed through the air, a storm of alien languages and jeering laughter. Above the noise, Malgren's voice echoed, amplified by the arena speakers. Today, my friends, we bring you a fight like no other. The human has been a curiosity, a fleeting spectacle, but now he faces his doom. In the center of the pit stood Ethan, his wrists bound by glowing energy cuffs, his face set in grim determination. Across from him, a massive gate creaked open, its hinges groaning like a beast awakening. Shadows spilled out first, tall and menacing. Then came the figure, Kragoth. The crowd erupted at the sight of the arena's deadliest warrior. Kragoth was a monstrous blend of flesh and metal, his cybernetic enhancements glinting under the harsh lights. Standing nearly twice Ethan's height, he was built to destroy, with arms that ended in massive blades and a chestplate adorned with scars of past victories. From the prisoner cells above, Xerac watched in tense silence. He gripped the bars so tightly his chains groaned in protest. "They've sent Kragoth," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "Malgren doesn't want a fight. He wants an execution." Ethan kept his gaze fixed on Kragoth, tuning out the crowd's deafening roars. He knew he was outmatched in size and strength, but that wasn't what worried him. It was Kragoth's eyes, cold, calculating, devoid of anything human or alien. This was a creature that fought without mercy, without hesitation. The announcer's voice boomed again. "Begin." Kragoth wasted no time. He charged, his massive blades slicing through the air with terrifying speed. Ethan dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the attack. The impact of Kragoth's strike shattered the ground where Ethan had been standing. The crowd screamed for blood, their voices blending into a cacophony of chaos. Ethan rolled to his feet, grabbing a piece of shattered debris from the ground. Kragoth turned, his movements unnervingly fluid for something so massive. He lunged again, and Ethan ducked, using the debris as a makeshift shield. It splintered on impact, but it bought him precious seconds. "You're fast," Kragoth growled, his voice a guttural snarl. "But speed won't save you." Ethan didn't respond. He was already moving, circling Kragoth, searching for an opening. He noticed the faint hum of the cybernetic implants and the way Kragoth's movements occasionally lagged by a fraction of a second. The enhancements were powerful, but not flawless. Above, Xerac clenched his fists, his mind racing. Ethan was holding his own, but it wasn't enough. Not against Kragoth. Not against Malgren's rigged system. Then it hit him. The power core. Ethan's earlier reconnaissance flashed through Xerac's mind. If the core could disrupt the arena systems, maybe it could disrupt Kragoth's implants too. Xerac turned to Grelk, who was watching the fight with a mixture of awe and terror. "Grelk," Xerac said urgently, "you still have those tools you smuggled." Grelk's compound eyes darted to Xerac. "You can't be serious. If the guards catch us." "They won't," Xerac interrupted. "But if we don't act, the human dies." Grelk hesitated, then nodded. He pulled a small concealed device from his cell wall, a makeshift tool made from scraps stolen over years. Xerac's chains clanked as he moved closer, his towering figure radiating determination. "I'm breaking us out," Xerac growled, "and we're taking the fight to Malgren." Back in the arena, Ethan's plan was taking shape. He baited Kragoth into another charge, then dodged at the last second, causing the massive warrior to slam into a broken pillar. The impact sent cracks spidering through the arena floor, but more importantly, it exposed a weak point in Kragoth's armor, a vulnerable junction where metal met flesh. Ethan didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, aiming for the weak spot with a jagged shard of metal. The makeshift weapon plunged into the joint, eliciting a roar of pain from Kragoth. The crowd gasped, their bloodlust briefly replaced by shock. But Kragoth wasn't done. He swung his arm, catching Ethan with a backhand that sent him sprawling. Ethan hit the ground hard, the taste of blood in his mouth. His vision blurred, but he forced himself to his feet. He couldn't afford to stop. Not now. In the control room overlooking the arena, Malgren watched with growing fury. "End this," he barked to his technicians. "Send the drones." But before they could respond, the lights flickered. Alarms blared. The technicians scrambled, their screens glitching as systems began to fail. "What is happening?" Malgren roared. Deep in the tunnels, Terok and Grelk stood over the damaged power core. Sparks flew from the machinery as Terok ripped another panel free, exposing a web of glowing circuits. Grelk worked quickly, his nimble fingers bypassing the energy relays. "The core is overloaded," Grelk said, his voice shaking. "The whole arena's tech will start shutting down." "Good," Zarok growled. "Let's make Malgren feel powerless for once." Back in the arena, Kragoff staggered. His implants sparked and hissed, his movements growing sluggish. Ethan noticed immediately. The crowd, unaware of the disruption, began to cheer louder, thinking it was part of the fight. Ethan seized the moment. With Kragoff's cybernetics failing, his strength and precision were no longer insurmountable. Ethan dodged another clumsy swing, then leaped onto Kragoff's back, using the warrior's own weight against him. He struck the exposed joint again, this time severing the connection entirely. With a deafening crash, Kragoff collapsed to the ground, defeated. The arena fell silent. Ethan, battered but alive, stood over his fallen opponent, his chest heaving. He turned his gaze upward, toward Malgren's viewing box. "This is just the beginning," he shouted, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You can't control us forever." The rebellion unleashed. The arena was chaos. Sparks rained down from malfunctioning systems, and the once imposing energy fields flickered and collapsed, leaving the arena exposed. The crowd, caught between awe and panic, began to scatter as the realization set in. Something had gone terribly wrong. Ethan stood in the middle of the arena, bloody but unbroken, as Kragoff's lifeless form lay in a heap nearby. The roar of the crowd was gone, replaced by the distant blaring of alarms and frantic shouts of guards scrambling to restore order. He wiped blood from his lip, his eyes scanning the stands. Malgren was no longer in his viewing box. The rebellion had begun. In the prisoner cells above, Zarok's massive hands worked furiously to dismantle the final lock on his energy chains. Grelk hovered nearby, his wiry frame darting between guards who had been caught off guard by the power outage. Prisoners banged on their cells, shouting for freedom. "Hurry, Zarok," Grelk hissed, his multiple eyes darting to the entrance. "The guards will regroup any second." With a final grunt, Zarok snapped the lock free, the glowing cuffs falling to the ground. He straightened to his full height, his orange eyes blazing with determination. He grabbed a fallen guard's energy weapon, its weight reassuring in his grip. "Open the cells," Zarok commanded. "Every single one." Grelk hesitated, his clawed fingers hovering over the control panel. "All of them, even the ones for." "All of them," Zarok barked. "If we want to win, we need everyone." Grelk nodded, his fingers flying over the controls. With a loud hiss, the cell doors slid open, and prisoners poured out. Aliens of every shape and size, their eyes gleaming with a mix of desperation and fury. Back in the arena, Ethan heard the distant sound of metal grinding and shouts growing louder. He turned toward the prisoner cells just as Zarok emerged, leading a wave of freed fighters. The sight was like a jolt of electricity through the arena. What had started as a flicker of rebellion was now a wildfire. "Zarok," Ethan called, relief washing over him. Zarok met his gaze, nodding. "You survived," Zarok said as he approached, his voice gruff but tinged with approval. "You gave me the time," Ethan replied, gripping Zarok's forearm in a gesture of solidarity. "Now let's finish this." The rebellion spread like wildfire. Freed prisoners swarmed the guards, overwhelming them with sheer numbers. Zarok led the charge, his strength and combat experience turning the tide in every skirmish. Ethan followed close behind, his mind racing as he barked orders and improvised plans. "Take the weapons from the guards," Ethan shouted. "Use their own tools against them." The prisoners obeyed, arming themselves with stolen weapons. The energy fields that had once caged them were now their shields, repurposed to block enemy fire. Grelk darted to Ethan's side, his insectoid limbs trembling with adrenaline. "The tunnels lead straight to the main control room," he said quickly. "That's where Malgren is. If we take it, we control the arena." "Then that's where we're going," Ethan said, his jaw tightening. He turned to Xarok. "Can you hold the line here?" Xarok nodded. "Go. End this." The tunnels were a maze of flickering lights and echoing footsteps. Ethan, Grelk, and a small group of rebels moved swiftly, their stolen weapons ready. The deeper they went, the louder the alarms grew, and the more they felt the weight of what they were about to face. When they reached the door to the control room, Grelk froze. "This is it," he whispered, "but it'll be heavily guarded." Ethan's grip tightened on his weapon. "Then we fight." The doors slid open, revealing Malgren and his elite guards. The warlord stood at the center of the room, his imposing figure draped in dark armor that shimmered with alien technology. His cold, predatory eyes locked onto Ethan, a sneer curling his lips. "You've caused quite the mess, human," Malgren said, his voice dripping with disdain. "But this ends now." The guards raised their weapons, and the room exploded into chaos. Blaster fire lit up the control room as Ethan and his rebels fought fiercely. Grelk darted between consoles, disabling systems, and creating further havoc. Malgren's guards were well trained, but they were outnumbered and overwhelmed. Ethan focused on Malgren. The warlord was no mere tyrant. He was a warrior. Their battle was brutal, each strike calculated. Malgren's strength was unmatched, but Ethan's determination refused to falter. "You think you can take my empire?" Malgren snarled, swinging a blade-like weapon. "You're nothing." Ethan dodged, countering with a strike to Malgren's exposed side. "I don't need to take your empire," he said through gritted teeth. "I just need to break it." With a final, desperate move, Ethan lunged, driving his stolen weapon into Malgren's chest. The warlord staggered, his armor sparking, before collapsing to the ground. As the battle ended, the alarms fell silent. Ethan stood over Malgren's fallen form, his chest heaving. Around him, the rebels cheered, their voices rising in triumph. Xarok burst into the room moments later, his expression unreadable. He took in the sight of Malgren's lifeless body, then turned to Ethan. "You did it." "We did it," Ethan corrected, his voice firm. "This wasn't just me. It was all of us." Xarok nodded, his respect for the human clear in his gaze. "Then let's finish it. Let's make sure this place never enslaves anyone again." Ethan smiled faintly. "Agreed. Freedom through courage." The arena was silent. The once deafening roar of the crowd had faded to nothing, replaced by the quiet hum of malfunctioning systems and the distant crackle of flames. Ethan stood in the center of the control room, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. Around him, the remnants of Malgren's empire lay in ruin, guards disarmed, systems disabled, and the warlord himself lifeless at his feet. Xarok entered the room, his massive frame silhouetted against the flickering lights. Behind him, a wave of freed prisoners poured in, their eyes wide with disbelief and newfound hope. For the first time in years, they weren't slaves. They were free. "You've done it, human," Xarok rumbled, his voice low and almost reverent. "Malgren is dead. The arena is ours." Ethan looked around at the faces of the rebels, a mix of species and shapes, each one bearing the scars of captivity. He shook his head. "We did it," he said firmly, meeting Xarok's gaze. "I couldn't have done this alone." As the realization of victory settled over the rebels, Grelk scurried to the central console, his nimble fingers flying over the controls. "The systems are shutting down," he announced, his voice trembling with both excitement and fear. We have control of the arena's mainframe, but the power core is unstable. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? It means this place isn't going to last, Grelk replied. The core's overload will collapse the entire structure. We have to get out. Now. A murmur of panic rippled through the group, but Ethan raised his voice, steady and commanding. No one panics. We came here to free ourselves, and that's exactly what we'll do. Sarek, can you lead the prisoners out? Zaruk nodded. I'll take them through the tunnels. But what about you? Ethan's gaze flicked to the console. There's something I need to finish. Saruk hesitated, his orange eyes narrowing. Don't be a fool, human. You've already done enough. Ethan smiled faintly. Not yet. The tunnels were a flurry of motion as Karak guided the prisoners to safety. The ground shook beneath their feet, and the walls groaned under the strain of the collapsing structure. Despite the chaos, Sarak's voice carried over the noise, urging the rebels forward. For the first time in years, he felt alive, not as a survivor, but as a leader. Back in the control room, Ethan worked quickly, his hands moving over the console as Grelk provided frantic instructions. The arena's communication system had been disabled during the rebellion, but Ethan was determined to send one final message, a warning to anyone who might try to rebuild Malgrun's empire. The screen flickered to life, displaying a broadcast signal. Ethan took a deep breath and began to speak. This is Ethan Drake, prisoner of the Galactic arena, he said, his voice steady despite the shaking ground. To anyone watching, know this. The arena is gone. Its slaves are free. And if you think you can rebuild what Malgrun started, you'll face the same fate. He paused, his gaze hardening. This galaxy doesn't belong to tyrants. It belongs to those who fight for freedom. He ended the broadcast and turned to Grelk. Let's go. The two of them sprinted through the tunnels as the arena crumbled around them. Walls collapsed, sparks rained down, and the air was thick with smoke. When they reached the exit, the sight of Taruk and the freed prisoners waiting outside was a welcome relief. You made it, Zarek said, his tone betraying his surprise. Of course we did, Ethan replied with a tired grin. Did you doubt me? Zarek chuckled, a deep rumble that was almost a laugh. I'm starting to learn not to. As the last remnants of the arena collapsed in a deafening roar, the freed prisoners stood together under the open sky. Some wept, others cheered, and a few simply stared at the horizon, as if unable to believe they were no longer trapped. Ethan looked at the group, his heart heavy with the weight of what they had endured, but also lightened by the hope of what lay ahead. What now? Grelk asked, his voice quiet. Ethan glanced at Sarek, then at the horizon. We rebuild, he said simply, not just for us, but for anyone out there still living in chains. We show them that freedom is possible. Sarek stepped forward, towering over the human. You could leave, you know. Go back to Earth. You've earned it. Ethan smiled faintly. Maybe one day, but not yet. There's still work to do. Sarek extended his massive hand, and Ethan took it. Their handshake was more than an agreement, it was a promise. Together, they turned to face the freed prisoners, a new dawn rising behind them.